All right, folks, what I want to focus on is when having a chat with your client, it's not always about the rate. It's about the value that you can bring to the table. And there's normally a couple sets of points that are worth mentioning to your client when you're having a conversation with them about either renewing their mortgage, refinancing, or you're buying a new home and you're comparing options. You want to ask these questions. Number one, cash flow. What is the mental number you have for your monthly payment, whether it's just the mortgage or all your credit expenses? Sometimes it's worth going through all those expenses that they have to understand what that looks like. Because if your client's saying to you, I want the best rate, I want the best rate, that's the most important part. And you say, cool, I understand, client. Put a pause on that for a second. I've noticed that in your credit report, you've got a bunch of unsecured balances, some credit cards and line of credits. Tell me about that. And they'll tell you whatever it is. And you might say, look, there's several hundred or several thousands of dollars worth of monthly payments to service this debt. What if I was able to consolidate a solution for you where your monthly payment is going to be X? And it's really important to have a conversation from a very practical monthly payment perspective, because that's what people remember. So you saying to your client, I can get you a rate of 3.8 versus 4% is great. But when you break that down further and say, listen, you're currently paying $5,000 between mortgages and line of credits and so on, but I can bring that down to $3,500. That has way more value and impact to most people, because that's how they manage their books, is on a bi-weekly or on a monthly basis. They're going to remember that math and say, wait a second, if I can reduce my overhead by that much, that's going to give me a lot more breathing room. I can probably save some money. I've got these little bills and investments I'd like to take advantage of. It's going to help them understand. So don't get so caught up in the rate. Let's talk about cash flow, because for some people that triggers them, and that's kind of what they need to hear to get into, what their best options are. Number two is essentially equity and liquidity. Very often it's going to be a HELOC. So how important is it to you, client, having access to a line of credit, having access to emergency funds? What is your emergency plan right now? If you were to lose your job, I don't see any investments here you haven't told me about. What is the plan there? And if there's an opportunity to give them a line of credit, whether it's $50, $100, or several $100,000, that's one of those things you want to dive into when you're having that discovery call, is how important is it to have access to an emergency account? Because just because you got them a great rate, you're saving them $50 a month for some lender that doesn't give you all these bells and whistles, compared to a lender that has that, and that's something they've identified could be important, especially when they're maybe going on mat leave. That's a big cue. They're having some kids, partner's pregnant, maybe they're thinking about getting into a self-employment role or consulting or something. If they start giving you these little cues, you want to come back and say, well, hold on a second. You said your wife's pregnant, or you said that you're thinking about getting into a role in 12 months maybe. Well, why not consider a HELOC? Because I don't see any savings here to fall back on. Those sort of things, again, you're adding way more value, and you're also listening to the actual needs of that client. Even if they haven't told you that's important to them, sometimes they just don't know any better. So you want to be able to identify that for them as well. Another really big one is just prepayments. Like, how flexible do you want this mortgage? Is there any chance that these prepayments are important to you? Because some clients get massive bonuses at the end of the year, and that feature may be how you sell this mortgage to them. Maybe the rates are going to be roughly the same, but you might say to them, listen, this lender has a 20% prepayment privilege that you could do anytime you want. And I notice you have these massive bonuses. So you can not only prepay your mortgage, but if I set it up with a readvanceable HELOC, that prepayment you've made will unlock a certain amount of HELOC, which you can lean on if needed throughout the year before your next bonus. Having conversations about what really matters to the client and really diving into those questions is going to help you get a much better proposal and a much better solution to your client. The PPM calculator is just going to identify, if you're looking at an existing database, it's going to identify what the penalty looks like, and it should create a starting point if you're using that tool to sort of reach out to clients and say, hey, listen, I found an opportunity to help you save some money. Let's hop on a call. But these questions are how you're actually going to execute and get that deal done. You need to dive deeper into the questions, use the PPM to identify any opportunities that exist, but ask those questions to actually find the solution and help convert that client and get a deal done. All best practices we should be leaning on.